Good evening, everyone, and thank you for registering for this evening's talk. On behalf of the Cambridge University Bahá'í Society, I would like to welcome you to the fourth of 8 talks by 8 international speakers in this particular series. Your microphone and camera have been turned off, but the chat feature is on for any questions for the speaker to address at the end. My name is Mira, and I'm a member of the Cambridge Baha'i community. In collaboration with the Cambridge University Bahá'í Society, these 8 talks have been organized to commemorate the centenary of the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá on the 27th of November, 1921. For some of you, this may be the first time you're learning about Abdul-Bahá, and perhaps it was the topic of the talk that intrigued you. For others, you may wish to gain a greater understanding. So I'd just like to share a little about Abdul-Bahá. After the passing of his father, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, Abdul-Bahá devoted his ministry to furthering his father's faith and to promoting the ideals of peace and unity. As well as being a prisoner for over 40 years, he was also knighted by the British Empire for his humanitarian work during the First World War. But this is simplifying his life, significance, and achievements, not only to the new religion, but also his significance to us and the world today. Hence, these 8 talks seek to cover some of that impact he made and continues to make. Each speaker, as an academic specialist in their given areas, has researched their interest in the work, teachings, and life of Abdul-Bahá, and the talks cover diverse subjects. We're extremely grateful for the time each speaker is giving to share their work and insights. The talk will be approximately 45 minutes. There'll be some time at the end to answer your questions. Please write them in the chat and we shall address as many of them as possible at the end of the talk. All the talks are being recorded and will be shared on the Baha'i Society YouTube channel following the live event. If you have any questions after the talk, please email the Baha'i Society via the email address, which will appear in the final slide. After the talk, you'll receive a follow-up email with a list of the remaining talks, and you're welcome to share this list. Please register yourself for the other talks, but this is indeed a really unique opportunity. So I'd like now to welcome our speaker for this evening, Maja Groff. I think many, if not all of you, have read her very prolific bio, so I shan't go into detail as there's so much to say. Maja is an international lawyer based in The Hague and is a convener of the Climate Governance Commission, which seeks to propose high-impact global governance innovations adequate to meet the climate challenge. In fact, she's fresh from representing the international Baha'i community at the COP26 conference in Glasgow. Amongst her many notable achievements, she was a co-winner of the 2018 New Shape Prize for Global Governance Innovation and is a co-author of the 2020 book, Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century. She currently serves on the advisory boards of BCorp Europe and ebbf, organizations devoted to ethical business. Her talk this evening will explore the contemporary relevance of the Tablet to The Hague, a Baha'i document of far-reaching importance, which sketches key principles to ensure a sustainable international peace. So without further ado, I welcome Maja to speak with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Mira, for the wonderful welcome, and thanks to you and colleagues for this invitation. And thanks to everybody for joining on this Friday evening, which is, yes, quite cold and rainy here in The Hague. So I'll just get my PowerPoint up that I can share with you. Yes. Perfect. Wonderful, excellent. We should be all set then. So as Mira mentioned, I'm going to focus my comments tonight on this wonderful Tablet to The Hague written in 1919 by Abdu'l-Bahá well, delivered to The Hague in 1919. It was written slightly earlier, or a letter was received or written to Abdu'l-Bahá in 1916, actually. And this is a response to that earlier letter that he received in Haifa. So this letter to the Hague of 1919, there are actually two letters that Abdul-Bahá wrote, one in December 1919 and then one in 1920, July. Again, correspondence with this organization in The Hague, here where I'm sitting today. And I'll talk a bit about this organization he was corresponding with. But this letter, this tablet to The Hague is quite incredible, I find, as a Baha'i, but also as a practicing international lawyer, and as a concerned citizen, because it sketches sort of a blueprint or a recipe for a sustainable international peace. So that's why I think it's such an interesting letter to talk about together. And I hope tonight we can sort of together go on a journey through this letter, this tablet. And then I'm really looking forward to questions and discussions at the end. So I've also entitled this talk, Religious Modernity and Peace, because among the principles in the tablet that Abdu'l-Bahá sketches as really the foundations for a durable international peace, he makes quite a number of comments about religion as importance, spiritual practice as importance. And also he makes comments about what is the correct practice of religion? How should we use religion as human beings? How should it be employed in our societies and indeed in our individual lives? So I'm going to flag in particular some of those key insights into religion. And also sort of for modern contemporary people, I think, many of us, especially in the secular West, think, oh, religion is something of the past. Whereas in the Baha'i writings and indeed in this tablet, this sort of the proper practice of religion is really something for the future, for the present, and something, if correctly practiced, will help to establish the foundations for a true and durable universal peace. So I call this, maybe religious modernity. What is our true spiritual patrimony as a human species? What are the core teachings of all our various religions? Can they really support us now as we go forward? Also in the needed work, all of the work that still needs to be done if we're going to achieve a much more stable and healthy, durable peace at the international level and indeed at all levels. So The Hague today, it's really quite extraordinary that a key figure in the Baha'i faith wrote these letters, and this very meaty, the first letter of 1919 to The Hague. At that time, The Hague was even less of a sort of an international center and really kind of a marginal part of Europe. The Netherlands was at this time. But today, of course, it's an entirely different story. Today, The Hague is known as or the international legal capital of the world. It's dubbed the International City of Peace and Justice. And currently, it's the second UN city after New York in terms of the different organizations here, with over 200 international organizations, tens of thousands of international staff here, both for international organizations, also pan-European organizations. For example, the International Court of Justice is here, established with the 1945 UN Charter, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, established in 1899, OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which a few years ago won a Nobel Peace Prize for removing and destroying chemical weapons from Syria, for example, and also the International Criminal Court opened its doors here in 2002. And because of all of these institutions and connections, and in particular the ICC, but not only, The Hague has become synonymous in public imagination with really like a higher level of justice at the international level that citizens hope to turn to, as a last resort when they're not getting justice at the national level. So it's quite interesting that The Hague has now, about 100 years later, really matured into this really flourishing capital of international peace and justice. So this first letter, tablet to The Hague of 1919, really deals with and puts at the forefront this question of universal peace. And Mira alluded to it in the introduction, but this tablet, in terms of the Baha'i writings and beyond, Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith after Abdu'l-Bahá, has called this tablet a tablet of far-reaching importance. So that indicates to us, okay, let's look at really what the content is and why this has such import in terms of, if we're going to find this sort of roadmap to global peace, what are the conditions precedent that we can establish a durable international peace? So, and this tablet, it wasn't simply that it was something written by Abdu'l-Bahá and dispatched by mail, by regular postal mail. There was an actual delegation that Abdu'l-Bahá convened and requested that come, so two Baha'is of the time to come to Haifa to collect the letter from Abdu'l-Bahá and then by hand deliver this letter to The Hague in person. And there's a wonderful resource, a website put together by some Baha'is here in the Netherlands with some photographs from that time when the tablet was delivered in May of 1919 to this basically was a citizens organization, this central organization for a durable peace. So this central organization for a durable peace in The Hague, now this would be very common. It's sort of like a civil society organization or an association with former diplomats and professionals. But this organization was established in 1915, really when World War I was raging, with, I think, about 9 members from European countries and then also an American US representative with an office in The Hague. There was a strong Dutch connection to Dutch citizens. And the Central Organization for Durable Peace at this time, which was relatively common, was an organization that was proposing, okay, what are the principles? What are the principles that we need to put in place to avoid further war? Not only to stop the current World War I, but then what conditions do we need to establish to really put an end to war? So they had a 9-point plan, and you've probably heard of Woodrow Wilson's, 14-point plan. So in this context, Abdu'l-Bahá, really wanted to write to this group of citizens and to encourage their work, and really it seems like telling them you're really on the right track. And he uses very warm and encouraging language. In the letter, he says, "You esteemed ones who are pioneers among the well-wishers of the world of humanity." So, and just to put a bit of more historical context, by the time, because of the war, postal channels were blockaded, so he didn't receive the previous letter from them, the central organization that was written in 1916, until 1919. So he promptly responds and sends the delegation. But by the time he sends, he drafts and sends this 1919 tablet, there was already the Paris Peace Conference meeting to hash out, the terms of the peace for after World War I to establish the League of Nations. So he's writing at this crux point in history where this terrible war had just come to a close, and the new foundations for what everyone hoped would be a durable peace were being set in place. And just a historical note also with for The Hague, The Hague had a bit of a history before this letter written by Abdu'l-Bahá. There were some very important developments in The Hague in 1893, 1899, where the bases for the international laws of war, international humanitarian law, were put in place. And also there was these big Hague peace conferences in 1899 and 1907, which really started to lay the foundations for the League of Nations. So you can see also in terms of these, green shoots of, okay, trying to tame humanity's approach to war, trying to settle disputes peacefully, which first was put on the table institutionally in 1899. You can see why Abdu'l-Bahá also is writing and connected to The Hague as this city. And then, of course, the calamity and the tragedy of World War I was fresh on everybody's minds. And I'll move in a moment to start going through some of the passages of the tablet to the Hague, where he talks about the nature of the war as a human institution and the consequences. But of course, you know, writing at this time in 1919, this was the deadliest war in human history to date, and so nonsensical, where there were approximately 10 million military deaths, 7 million civilian in the war. And also, interestingly, something that Abdu'l-Bahá alludes to in the tablet is the fact that technology had advanced to such an extent in World War I that it was so devastating, calamitous, that this advancement in you know, the terrible technologies of war was to such an extent that humanity really had to resolve its issues and try to solidify an international peace. But if he was writing that, you know, World War I, how much more so is that in after World War II, which of course we then got the UN Charter, which went further again to really strengthen the League of Nations framework or blueprint. And then also today, I would mention and note that we're in another dangerous period of history where we have to think very carefully and much more deeply about, you know, what really are the foundations for a durable international peace. We've seen noted by many scholars and commentators, international security experts, international relations scholars have noted, you know, these growing geopolitical tensions between China and the US in particular, but of course we have other players, both regional, international, and this is a quotation from Stockholm Institute for Peace Research about this phase we're now in, which indeed is another dangerous time in human history, where there are power contests, where there's instability in the international system, and such trends also with increasing or seemingly restarting arms races between different nations. This prompted Mikhail Gorbachev a few years ago, you know, in our times to talk about really the persistent hazards and dangers of nuclear arsenals, and not taking this serious and renewing and updating our international arms control treaties and mechanisms, because again, World War I technology then was devastating. World War II even more devastating. We've had the UN Charter, which has kept this relative long peace at the global level since 1945, but again now some would argue we're in another period of great danger. So I would say that the relevance of the tablet is very alive still today. So this tablet starts with Abdu'l-Bahá speaking about the nature of war, archetypally as human beings. How should we understand this human institution of war that has plagued us throughout so much of human civilization? And at the beginning of this letter, he talks about these really beautiful metaphors and contrasts between states of war and states of peace. For example, taking the experience of World War I, war is destruction, universal peace is construction. War is part of the world of nature, of sort of these animal drives for survival, whereas peace is really also associated with a state of spiritual enlightenment, heavenly light, cooperation, everlasting life. There's all these very spiritual metaphors, you know, mutual aid and cooperation amongst peoples. So really stressing that in all the religions of God, the state of peace is the state which is associated with a spiritual reality. And this object lesson of World War I was so very clear about the darkness and rapacity of war. And in our own times, we only need look at Syria, for example, to see this very sharp contrast, for example, in these images, holy sites and architectural monuments. You see the before and after war pictures, also a hospital destroyed, a market destroyed. So again, like today, we have these isolated wars, which have these appalling effects. Not a World War III yet, but truly those contrasts that Abdu'l-Bahá makes are so compelling and should prompt us to think how we can really put in place these preventative measures to abolish war completely as a human institution. So yes, he, again, in the tablet, underlying the nature of war. So really trying to say this is a terrible institution, and all the construction we find in the world is a result of fellowship and love, which is a state of peace. You sort of, in other great spiritual teachings and teachers, you see some of the same themes of, Gandhi famously said, we underestimate the power of love and cooperation in our societies. Really, love and cooperation is everywhere. And it's a result of that love and cooperation that we're able to function as societies and move forward. So for me in this tablet, it's really, Abdu'l-Bahá is trying to shine a light on this terrible institution of war that has really plagued humanity for so many millennia, really, and saying, now it's really time to put a stop to it. And here is a sort of recipe that we can follow to do this. And he also, again, writing at the time of the adoption of the League of Nations, makes predictions as to World War II, because the foundations put in place by the international community were not strong enough. The conditions aren't met. He predicts that another future war will break out that will be fiercer. So again, a warning at that time, and indeed for our times as well. So again, he really praises the efforts of the citizen organization based in The Hague. And he also notes that at this time in human history, because the lived experience of World War I was so terrible, that souls, people around the world were much more awakened than usual with their conscience about how vitally important it was to think about the foundations for universal peace. So this was a very, flourishing time in human history where, because the situation was so bad, there were a lot of these citizen groups and thinkers trying to craft a new pattern for international life. So in that time, he's tapping into those ideas and that intellectual Geistgeist of that time. So moving to the principles for universal peace that are set forth in the tablet, and I've identified about 16. Others might group them in different ways. But firstly, he talks about unity of conscience that is so necessary for the international community to have in order to establish like a durable plan for peace. There has to be a strong edifice on which conceptually that humanity can build a plan for peace. And part of this unity of conscience is really committing to a plan and sufficient measures to establish a peace. So it's quite interesting that at this time in human history, for example, we have in a way this manifestation of unity of conscience in the international community. For example, the UN Charter, which was adopted after World War II, 1945, has been adopted, committed to by virtually every nation in the world. Also, the Sustainable Development Goals of 2015, the Paris Agreement on Climate, again, very wide, basically universal ratification. So we see this progress towards unity of conscience in the international community, in fact. But something that Abdu'l-Bahá notes about the negotiations in Paris at Versailles at the time, he hints at the sort of selfish state-based interests of the various power players at that time, which, because of these selfish interests, which was not a unified conscience, that the League of Nations would fail and a proper system wouldn't be set up. And of course, we can see those same very deep trends today, where we have the geopolitical contest, we have states really thinking in a mode of very short term and dysfunctional types of quote unquote self-interest. So this still is a principle that needs obviously a lot of work. Secondly, Abdu'l-Bahá talks about a very key Baha'i principle, which is the independent investigation of reality. So this is linked to also what he's going to say soon about the abolition of various prejudices. But it's sort of like he's talking about a new steps towards a type of enlightenment to examine our inherited traditions, which the war institution is one of these inherited traditions and institutions. So he's really saying, listen, we need to cast off our backward traditions, all of us, whatever human society, human culture, we need to intellectually and personally, independently use our intellectual faculties to investigate reality. And then he makes a statement, reality is one, which is related to the scientific message, but also he's suggesting that the spiritual reality is also one and united. There are various inherent truths in all the divine religions where there's really core commonality and a reality that is unique to the human person and to the human soul that we can uncover and access. So thirdly, he talks about the oneness of the world of humanity. And he's using this metaphor, humanity, humans are we are all the sheep of God, so quite a Christian metaphor, and there will be other metaphors in other religions, and so, we are all created from the same dust. We should not put ourselves above any person. Humanity has this fundamental unity. And he also talks about this wonderful approach, because we're all sheep in this flock. We must have an attitude of compassion and empathy, and we must educate people. We must be compassionate and help people attain to a greater maturity, which would involve, being pro-social beings, being, self-control, self-direction, peacefulness, cooperation. So really sort of like this educational mindset, this compassionate, nurturing, and helping mindset based on the unity of humanity. We should treat each other with care and try to spread the education and help the any immature, members of this flock to mature as we all have the capacity to do. Now, this is one of the key teachings Abdu'l-Bahá talks about in terms of how religion should be properly practiced. Religion must be the cause of fellowship and love. If it becomes the cause of estrangement, that is not needed. For religion is like a remedy. If it aggravates the disease, then it becomes unnecessary. So other places he's talked about, if a religion causes strife and conflict, it is a religious act to withdraw from that religion. So this sort of goes to the core also of like, if we are looking for religion of the future, religion of modernity, post-modernity, wherever we're headed, this is really, I would say, one of the core teaching is like, if religion is not causing fellowship, harmony, love, then it cannot be called a true religion. That is the purpose of religion as a divine bounty, according to Abdu'l-Bahá. Also, religion must be in conformity with science and reason, which is again something to modern ears will be quite strange, because in association with religion and unscientific thought and unreasonable thought. So this is very, very interesting. Science and religion must work in harmony together, so that superstition again does not cloud the world of humanity. Then he moves on to the prejudices, which he says have caused all of the wars in the past. So these different types of prejudices that we hold, humans in our various communities, have really caused the conflict and strife and the institution of war, including religious prejudice, racial prejudice, political prejudice, economic, and quote unquote patriotic. And he says, because of these, for a period of 6,000 years of human history, the world of humanity has not been free from war, strife, and bloodthirstiness. So really, we have to dig into these prejudices if we're going to try to establish very secure foundations for a durable peace. Then I'll just go through quite quickly the different prejudices. Religious prejudices, again, he's saying any prejudice on the basis of religion is unacceptable. Religion, again, should be the cause of unity. Different faiths, diverse faiths should be dealing with each other with fellowship and friendship. So this is completely fruitless if religion is not building community, love, harmony, and also connecting the disparate parts or the various different religious traditions. And again, he's saying, he's emphasizing this notion of the unity of humanity and making a reference back to Adam and Semitic religious traditions. We are all branches of the same tree, so it makes no sense. It makes no sense to have religious prejudice. He talks about patriotic prejudice and is very scathing in this respect, as of course, you know, he's dealing with this European theater of war, observing, saying that is absolute ignorance for the to have this national, you know, zeal, nationalism, overly nationalistic kind of patriotic prejudice, because the surface of the earth is one native land. We are one human family, and these boundaries are very artificial, they're created. And he even gives this example in the text: some souls from personal motives and selfish interests have divided each one of these continents and considered a certain part as their own. So he traces a lot of these national sovereign boundary kind of demarcations, which are indeed very artificial if you look at the earth from space, if you look at the reality of human commonality, and now indeed our very extreme interdependence on this one planet, that this is indeed ignorance, and we have to start thinking about the earth as one native land for humanity. And then he talks about political prejudice, which I interpret mostly as partisan politics and adhering too much to different political factions rather than finding commonality through consultation, finding unifying perspectives that serve all of humanity. Economic prejudices, he talks about first the benefits of trade and exchange among countries, which now we have quite a strong international norm also established in this respect. And he also talks about the voluntary sharing of one's property. So in contrast maybe to some economic strains of thought and theory at the time that he's writing, you know, the great communist revolutions or capitalist thought at that time, it's a totally different paradigm. Abdu'l-Bahá is saying no, we should all have this attitude, and this is again about the spiritual development of every individual human being. We should all have an attitude of sharing our material property in a voluntary, heartfelt way with others. So we abolish the extremes of wealth and property, and that we would do this willingly and because we want to care for the community. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some differences in economic resources and levels, but that we should have this attitude of generosity, sharing an abundance in a very ordered way that isn't about contention and strife. He also talks about the need for one universal language at the international level, so everybody feels at home. So so misunderstandings are transcended at the international level. Equality of men and women. Abdu'l-Bahá often talks about this metaphor of humanity with two wings. Both the male wing and the female wing, both must be fully equally developed if we're going to have peace, if we're going to truly flourish as a civilization. Now he comes to some more principles on religion and spiritual practice as necessary for this transition to a durable universal peace. Basically, he's talking about, like with those first metaphors of war versus peace, complete freedom and this competition, this base material competition for survival is really something that degenerates the human community, that leads to strife, and that we should really seek spiritual evolution through spiritual practice, which is the true freedom. So we can transcend this mere competitive struggle for survival and build these spiritual capacities for collaboration, for generosity, all of these divine principles for love and harmony. And then he talks about religion in society, the sort of the institution of religious practice throughout societies as a mighty bulwark that protects us and protects our societies. He talks about, the necessity for laws, criminal laws, where there's these mechanisms that we set up as societies to punish crimes, to deter crimes and other behaviors to keep the community ordered. But then he talks about really this religious practice or religion of God is needed to train the inner world of the human being, to have every individual strive for good action and virtuous behavior in its own right, and because that's part of our human nature and our aspiration. So really to train our inner world and to create a proper society, we as human beings, he's saying, we need religion. And this is interesting, of course, because of the secular Western perspective towards religion at the moment in general. But still, at the same time, about 80% of the world's population does have some religious affiliation. So of course, there's still this human need and hunger for religion. But then, okay, how do we properly practice these religions and take advantage of all of these spiritual resources? He then talks about the balance needed between material and divine civilization. Again, basically, we need material progress and affluence. People's needs, material needs should be taken care of, but we also need this spiritual development. And he says, for example, had material civilization been combined with divine civilization, these fiery weapons would never have been invented. So if there is this balance, then it's about our motivations, it's about our purposes. We would devote ourselves to completely to human well-being and to health. We would not invent such terrible weapons. And we still, of course, see today terrible weaponry, with the latest technology being developed. And this is in an imbalance. This is, again, this sort of baser type of conception of human existence that is still dominating. He also talks about universal education. which echoes back to sort of, nurturing the sick and the immature and educating everyone. So this is a key Baha'i principle that we should really ensure that every child is educated. And you can see how this is fundamental if we want a durable international peace, if we want participatory governance, and flourishing societies around the world. We should really ensure this. And there's some very prominent mention of universal or international quality education, the SDGs, for example, but this still has not been realized, of course, by the international community. He then talks about justice and right. We must have systems of justice in the world in order to have peace. Without justice, we cannot have peace. And then moderate freedom, like our conceptions, both in our political systems. We are not just rights-bearing entities with complete freedom. Moderate freedom, limits on our freedoms, and also responsibilities are core to living in society. And again, our pathway to what I think he would say would be our true freedom. Now, the last point that he makes in the tablet or the last principle that I've identified, is a correct view of human diversity. Human diversity in all of its various types of diversity and forms can be a source of conflict, can be a source of difference, but he's really emphasizing, as he does in many other talks and writings, this is part of human beauty and capacity. It's like different flowers in a garden, that adds beauty and like a wonderful kind of diverse harmony to the world. So, and this is really the correct view of human diversity. We should be celebrating and enjoying it, and it shouldn't be a cause of strife. So all of these principles, Abdu'l-Bahá says, these principles combine together in different ways. They're interwoven, they're interdependent. There are many of these principles that we need to realize to have, these secure foundations for international universal peace. But he says, if we don't address these various principles and make sure they're implemented, universal peace by itself will be very difficult to realize, which I think is quite interesting. And lastly, I will just mention, because I think this is also very important, those are the principles, that he talks about, but he also talks about one key institution at the international level that he would recommend, as opposed to the League of Nations as it was established. He suggests what he calls a Supreme Tribunal. And so he gives like specifications for such a tribunal. So it would be established on very fair, clear foundations. Every nation, parliaments or otherwise, would nominate candidates, which then would be confirmed by higher levels of government. There would be proportionate representation to the number of inhabitants of each country. Then this body, this international assembly, could decide on any important international issue that the whole world, the international community, would have to abide by, and they couldn't object because this would be a legitimate, clear procedure and type of duly established institution. So, of course, as he says, a limited and restricted league, this purpose will not be realized as it ought and should. And I just mentioned, he makes that comment about the deficiencies of the League of Nations, but of course, we still have very key deficiencies in the United Nations Charter that still don't exemplify such a supreme institution or tribunal. So where are we now? I could say much about the different principles, where we're now as an international community, but just briefly, a few points. We have had really major advancements in international human rights law, for example, covering so many of those prejudices that he laid out in 1919 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the other successive human rights instruments. We have more elaborated international norms, international laws that prohibit war, that constrain this terrible human institution of war. But we still have very weak international institutions on the enforcement front, in particular, the International Court of Justice which was established in 1945, for example, is not a universal or mandatory court for states. The UN Charter itself, with its General Assembly, which is not a proportionate representative body, the UN Security Council with these special privileged power seats for militarily strong countries, this has been frozen in time since 1945. Yet at the same time, we have flourishing civil society and citizen movements. And so I think an interesting question is also, what's the state of our religious communities throughout the world? If religion has this power to be the foundations for a peaceful world, where are we in terms of religious engagement with trying to build up these foundations for international peace? And indeed, despite these international norms, we still have persistent prejudices, corruption, global economic inequality, etc. So just to end before we move into questions, I'm very inspired by key figures, Eleanor Roosevelt with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, who have brought this kind of vision forward. And what you see in the tablet to the Hague, as Abdu'l-Bahá has sketched out, has really borne out in the efforts of many people from many diverse backgrounds in the 100 years since the tablet was written. So, and it's quite interesting in the end of this first letter he writes, he talks about what he sees as the quote unquote power of implementation of these principles as a foundation for universal peace. And he talks about the force of conscience, the power of our consciences. This is the implementation mechanism of all these principles. So he again stresses again and again in both of these letters to this organization the necessity that we all work very, very hard to establish these conditions for universal peace. It's incumbent on all of us to work hard for this mighty cause of peace, which is so fundamental to human flourishing. And there's this beautiful quote I like to share from Eleanor Roosevelt, just after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She says, okay, we've got the charter, we've got this declaration, but at the same time, we must rededicate ourselves to the unfinished task which lies before us. That is, this is a big project where we should be constantly, tirelessly working, but also with this broader vision of the multiple dimensions that need to be put in place for universal peace. And just to bring it full circle to end, because Abdu'l-Bahá wrote a letter to Andrew Carnegie, the wonderful Scottish-American philanthropist who was always, giving money to establish libraries in various parts of the world. He very much believed in education and also in like really carefully thought through philanthropy. And he gave money to establish the Peace Palace here in The Hague, where the International Court of Justice sits, which is a symbol about humanity's journey, which we are still on this journey, in the middle of this journey towards a real global peace system. And in Andrew Carnegie's words, he says, the Peace Palace in The Hague is, quote, the most holy building in the world because it has the holiest end in view. The highest worship is service to man. So I think that's a beautiful kind of closing of the circle, also because Carnegie exemplified this principle of voluntary sharing of one's wealth to build up society, to take care of others, to establish, harmonious, peaceful conditions in society. So I will end there and really look forward to questions and comments from all of you.
Thank you, Maja. That was really informative and really fascinating. It's been a while since I've read the two tablets to The Hague myself, and it was fascinating to be reminded how relevant the themes that he addressed in that first tablet in particular are today, if not more so relevant, I think, to what's going on in the world right now. And actually, one of the questions that was at the forefront of my mind has come from one of our participants here. The question was from Asaf to ask about how relevant, how the tablet was actually received at the time. Yeah, put it back. Can you tell us how Abdu'l-Bahā's tablet to the Hague was received? What, if any, was the response to the letter?
Yes, it's quite interesting from what I've been able to glean, because there's still like a lack of historical writing or going into depth and piecing together various bits. But from the research I've looked at, so first, when the tablet was delivered in 1919, this central organization for a durable peace was basically, in practical terms, disbanded, because the First World War had, formally ended. So this citizen organization said, okay, well, we have the League of Nations, and there was a lot of hope that, okay, this incorporated some of our principles of what we saw to be needed to establish an international peace that would be durable. So it was sort of like a bit of an anticlimax when the letter was delivered with the organization itself. Still, there were conversations with some of the remaining members, from who are still here in the Netherlands. And there were some letters exchanged. Well, there was a further letter sent back to Abdul-Bahá, and it's quite interesting. The response from those who are still sort of manning this central organization, part of what they said was, thank you so much. It's kind of thank you for your interest, and we hope to stay in touch. But then they make a caveat. They said, well, on the question of religion, our different groups and constituencies have had very different views. There are very different views on religion and politics. So they were very fractious and didn't have an agreement as to the role of religion. So I thought that was quite interesting that was part of the response. So that's as far as I've been able to unearth in terms of the reception of the letter.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone, please do send some questions through to the chat so that because Maja has got some time to address them. But while we're waiting for some questions, maybe I have a follow-up question here. So you mentioned that this central organization was disbanded, but was it readdressed when it was rebanded as the League of Nations? Is the letter still in existence today? And I know the Baha'is are represented at the UN, but are the tablets still acknowledged somewhere as part of the organization? Has it been readdressed?
Oh, you mean this central organization for a durable peace? Well, it was essentially sort of like a civil society organization, and no, as far as I know, it doesn't exist anymore. It was sort of formed in the spirit of the times, of to say, like, at this time of foment and also intellectual interrogation, in the heart of this great war, which everybody hoped would be the war to end all wars, World War I. It was an organization established to really think about, okay, how can we put in place key principles to end war for all time? So as far as I know, there's not like one successor organization, but who knows? It could have morphed into. Yeah.
Was the tablet readdressed by the League of Nations later on, or has it?
Oh, as far as I know, it was not sent to the League of Nations. I have not heard of anything of the sort of it being sent to the League of Nations. No, not that I know of. Yeah.
We just have a comment from Patsy, I think, who's enjoyed your talk, found it very interesting. If anyone has any more questions, please do post them through. Maja, is there anything that you'd like to elaborate on, any of the themes that you perhaps rushed through? To me, again, it's amazing to me that he wrote this tablet in 1919 and the second one in 1920, and you can read it today as if he's addressing the issues today as well. That's why I asked whether, in the organization of the UN now, as I said, the Baha'is are represented, but yes, whether this tablet is still
yeah, Mira, I think you've given me a very good idea.
Right?
I have never seen the Baha'i international community or others saying like, oh, we should really bring this tablet to the United Nations, or like, the United Nations obviously has different principal organs, has many different parts and bodies and agencies. So it's like, to bring it to the General Assembly, to bring it to the UN Security Council. Anyways, it's quite an interesting idea. And how to do that, and Yeah, that's a lovely idea, Amira.
Right, I look forward to hearing how that goes. So we have a question from Nassim, Paul, and Oliver. Do you think that climate change is now a driver of international conflict?
I mean, yes, and no, in the sense that it's, in some ways, the global climate challenge is bringing the world together in unprecedented ways, which hopefully those trends intensify and continue. But in terms of, the effects on the ground of climate change, it's well known and identified now that climate change and the ecological effects, desertification, lack of water, access to food, et cetera, is driving, some, or contributing. It's a threat multiplier. It might make conflicts worse. It might, foment different tensions that maybe could have been avoided. So yes, I think in terms of on the ground effects in various parts of the world, it is very worrying. And transborder disputes over water and so on will grow increasingly tense potentially. But on the other side of the coin, just like this Glasgow meeting, the last first 2 weeks of November, states were coming together in some unprecedented ways. It's not nearly enough yet, of course, but you did see, for example, a big announcement between US and China that they would work together further. So, and multiple other countries. So hopefully those collaboration trends at the very macro international level will intensify and increase for everybody's benefit for climate. Yeah.
Thank you, Maja. So we have just another minute or two. If there are no more questions, I just want, part of the series of talks is the purpose of the series of talks is to highlight the impact that Abdu'l-Bahá made in the world. And here was this man from the Middle East who wrote this letter to create an impact or to open up that discourse. How do you think we as individuals, if we are playing the part we want to play, we have certain religious or moral beliefs or ethical beliefs, it's very easy to be an observer and to watch what's going on. How do you think we could make that impact? What can we do? How do we reach the ears without, there's lots of things going on with protests, etc. Any thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that individuals can do and groups of citizens and communities. I just had a really wonderful discussion with a citizen group on the west coast of Canada, and I'm encountering many citizen groups who are so passionately aware of international governance and our global challenges and what should we do together. So I think, for example, like if the principles resonate in the tablet, just to talk about them and to think about how to implement them in one's life and community, and to raise this notion of human unity, I think it's so key and core. And this is a question Danielle put in the chat, pressing for us to view humanity in terms of our oneness. To what extent is a real understanding of our oneness by global players? I mean, I do see more and more that thinking in international fora and venues, largely not only, but a lot from civil society and observers and interlocutors, rather than all of the nation states. There's still those kind of, as Abdu'l-Bahá, these lesser animal drives that you kind of feel in the processes. But even further solidifying this understanding of the unity of humanity wherever we are, in whatever context, and then talking about it with our decision makers and leaders, and really thinking it through, like, what does this mean if we are one human family? To really talk about this as a key principle, I think is really, really, really powerful. And we can do it in any kind of context or venue.
We might have time for just one more quick question from Nicholas, where he says, the Treaty of Versailles was signed also in 1919. Do we know anything about what Abdu'l-Bahá thought about this and what impact it would have for peace?
Yes, Abdu'l-Bahá alludes to the negotiations, the diplomatic meetings in Versailles, in the first tablet in particular, and he notes that unity of conscience isn't there. It's too much the self-interest of various nations and powerful nations, and also that, you know, a truly sound system with proper institutions, with proper principles, so the nations can really come together with governance legitimacy. You know, in his Supreme Tribunal, he says there should be an assembly where all the populations of the world are represented proportionally, where there's like a procedure to appoint these, you know, educated or those who are very practically familiar with international affairs. So he's clear in various places in this tablet, but elsewhere also, no, there will be a greater war. This league is not enough. He makes that very clear. The foundations are not secure enough. The mentality is not progressed enough, etc. So one could also, you know, take this letter and look at the current United Nations system and critique it based on the principles he set out. And the current UN charter is not sufficient yet, also according to his criteria.
Thank you, Maja. I think we could carry on talking about this for hours. So we really appreciate your time this evening, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your progress to take the tablet back to the UN. I'll be happy to be a part of that delegation, so I look forward to that.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for the offer.
So thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and in particular, thank you to Maja for her time. I know she's still, you're probably exhausted from the COP26 conference, so we really appreciate you this evening and informing us of such a fascinating event 100 years ago. I just want to say to everyone who joined us this evening, you will receive a reminder about the next talks in this series. The next one will be next Friday. It'll be by Ishmael Velasco, who's a professional storyteller, and he's going to be storytelling from the life of Abdul-Bahá. And finally, if anyone has any follow-up questions or anything, we please do email the Baha'i Society email address, which is there, and we'll pass them on to Maja, and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Maja. Good night.